Hey everyone, good morning. Mike's actually on vacation this week, so he's not in the office. But everyone else is here. Everyone at ECA is there. Everyone else at 5Q is here, so I'll be doing the call today. Mike's really good at watching the comments and answering your questions as he goes. But because I don't do this as often, I'm not as good at that. So if I don't acknowledge your comments or answer your questions, it's probably because I'm not even watching for them. I'm not even seeing them. So I apologize for that up front. That said, this is one of my favorite things to talk about. So if you do have questions about anything you see or hear today, just email me or call me after the call and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anyone has. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're actually going to be talking about this picture. So if you're familiar with the presentation that increase your income by 25%, you know that this picture is part of that presentation. It's a slide. And this is the place where I ask, if you were to ask a mountain climber, what's their goal? So you're standing at the base of a mountain, you're looking up to the top, and you turn to the mountain climber beside you and you say, hey, what's your goal? What would he say? To make it up the mountain, right? But if you ask experienced climbers this question, you actually get a slightly different answer. What an experienced climber is going to tell you is that his goal is to make it safely up and safely down the mountain. And the reason he answers that way is because most climbing accidents, the vast majority, happen on the way down the mountain, not on the way up. And so we always say, well, you might wonder, why is that? Because you would think that coming down the mountain wouldn't be any different or any trickier than going up. If anything, you would think it would be easier. And what does that have to do with retirement? Well, it turns out that saving for retirement is a lot like climbing the mountain. You kind of save and invest for years and years until you get to that place where you can quit working, kind of that summit. And you think that coming down the mountain, which means staying retired without having to change your lifestyle, isn't going to be any different or any trickier than the way down. But it doesn't work that way. And that's what mountain climbers have learned. They've learned that coming down the mountain is a lot trickier and a lot more dangerous than coming down. And so what we're going to talk about today is the fact that it's a lot trickier and a lot more dangerous coming down the retirement mountain than it is going up. So we're going to kind of dig into why. Why is coming down the retirement mountain so different than going up? And we're actually going to dig into kind of 6 pitfalls and dangers unique to the way down that you don't have to fight or worry about on the way up. So it turns out that coming down really is more dangerous, and we're going to kind of dig into why. And that's the first part of the call. Maybe the last 10 minutes of the call, we're going to talk about how, if that weren't enough, there's actually a perfect storm of conditions right now that makes retiring really tricky at the moment. And that's on top of the 6 things that we're going to talk about. Then we're going to kind of spend a few minutes talking about what you can do about it. We're going to talk about what a glide path withdrawal strategy is and why it works best when you have to deal with the perfect storm of conditions that we're going to look at, and those 6 reasons why it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain. So let's just kind of jump in and look at the 6 reasons it's harder to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up. And ultimately, what we're going to be talking about is this phenomenon. So you can see in these charts, if you look at that blue chart to the left, everybody makes it up the retirement mountain. We're looking at 2 portfolios, portfolio A and B, where the returns have been flipped, but we see that no matter, everyone makes it up, but not everyone makes it down. Why is it that some people make it up and down, and some people make it up, but don't make it down? And we've seen that this happens in real life. This is a chart of this actually happening to actual people who retired in 2000 and 2001. So it's not a hypothetical. It needs to be on people's radar. Now, here's the thing that I really kind of want to dig into today, and that is that it's possible to look at this chart and draw the wrong conclusion. You might think, looking at this, that all you really have to worry about is withdrawing money during a downturn turn in the market in those first couple of years of retirement. That's the problem. That's what sequence of return risk is. It's the market being crappy in your first 3, 4, 5 years of retirement. But as we go through the call, I think you're going to see that, yeah, you have to be worried about that. But this is what you really have to be worried about. These purple spans, a sideways market. That's way more terrifying, or should be, to a retiree than a 3-year downturn in the market. So yes, while this is scary, the idea of the purple span should be downright terrifying to retirees, and we're going to look at why. So why is it so much more difficult? Why are these purple spans so problematic when you're coming down the retirement mountain than when you're going up? Well, reason number one is it's not okay to fail. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say you're 45 years old and you have this idea that you're going to retire at 65. So 20 years between now and the time you're going to retire, and you set a goal for yourself to save $1 million. So we fast forward to age 65, you look at your account balance and you see, I've got $900,000. My goal was $1 million, but I have $900,000. And so do you A, tear your clothes, pull out your hair and kind of curse your bad luck? Or do you B, pat yourself on the back and say, hey, $900,000. That's not bad. I mean, I know I set a goal for $1 million, but to get this far, to have $900,000, I did a pretty good job. And you know what? If it's really important for me to have $1 million in retirement, I'll just work a couple more years. Or maybe I'll sell the house and downsize. No worries. I'll make it work. See, when there's a shortfall in your goal when you're heading up the mountain, it's okay. There's some setbacks, it's okay. We'll figure it out. We've got time. We'll make it work. There's a margin for error there. But now, that doesn't work that way in reverse. Suppose you're 65 and you realize, given my spending, if I live to 85, I'm going to need $1 million. If you end up having 900,000, you come up $100,000 short. That's not okay. Because now all you can do is try and think, well, is there somebody that will hire me at 85 years old to go back to work? Or is there any way I can die a few years sooner? There's no margin for error coming down the mountain. And that's one of the big reasons it's so much more difficult. See, there's a margin for error going up, and we'll dig into this a little bit more as we go through the call, but there's zero margin for error coming down. You've got to be spot on. That's reason number one. There's zero margin for error coming down the mountain. There was margin for error going up, no margin for error going down. And that kind of leads to reason number two. Because there's no margin for error coming down the mountain, you have to not only be accurate, but also precise with your withdrawals. You can't be in the ballpark. You've got to have it down really, really tight. So take a look at this chart, and this will probably give you more of an idea of what I mean by that. What this chart is doing is it's saying, well, let's look at somebody who follows something like the 4% rule. They take a fixed amount in their first year, and then they just adjust it up for inflation. So imagine the first year they take $32,000, and someone else takes 33, and the next person 34, and the next person 35, and the next person 36, until you get to that red line, which is the person who's taking $37,000 per year. Now, you wouldn't think the difference between 32 and 37,000 is a lot. That's really, in the grand scheme of things, maybe $400, $420 a month more. That's not a big difference. But look what happens over time. You can see that it starts out being no difference at all, but that as time goes on, that difference becomes wider and wider and wider until it could be the difference between success and failure. And so the moral of the story is you can't be cavalier when you're setting your initial withdrawal rate, even if everything going forward is calculated off of that. it becomes super important to have that really, really good. You can't be off by a lot. You can't, the different, look at 30, even 36,000. Even being off by that much at the beginning can cost you at the end. Being off by $5,000 in this example is fatal. Being off by $4,000 is near fatal. You've got to be really, really careful because there's no margin for error. And that's ultimately the problem with the 4% rule. It's too generic. It really wasn't meant for everyone. It was meant more as a rule of thumb. So reason number one that it's more difficult to come down the retirement mountain is there's zero margin for error. And reason number two that it's so difficult to come down the retirement mountain is you have to be accurate and precise. So those are just two of the 6 reasons that coming down the retirement mountain is so different and so much more difficult than going up the retirement mountain. So let's talk about reason number 3. Reason number 3 is something that I don't think we talk enough about. So reason number 3 is even success feels a lot like failure. So to kind of dig into that and look at and kind of get some context and some background here, let's take a look at those charts again. We know that everyone makes it up the retirement mountain, and we know that not everyone makes it down. And so what we're trying to figure out is, why doesn't everyone make it down? Well, if you look at that green chart, you can see that, you know, if you hit that downturn in the market early in retirement, that's nearly always fatal. And if you hit that downturn at the very end of your retirement, doesn't seem to matter much. So timing is one thing. Hit that downturn in the beginning, that's bad. Hit that downturn at the end, not so bad. What happens if you hit that downturn in the middle? What if you experience something like those purple spans? Because if you look at those last two, if you kind of take out the Great Depression where you had that huge drop at the very outset, and you just look at those other purple spans, they don't seem to begin with huge downturns. It looks like it's just kind of up and down, up and down, up and down, with most of the volatility somewhere in the middle. So if you don't hit that downturn at the beginning and you don't hit that downturn at the end, instead you kind of hit it in the middle, what's that going to look like? How's that going to feel? Well, unsurprisingly, it's going to look a lot like this. The distribution of outcomes is going to be kind of this bell curve. So that probably shouldn't surprise us. So what do we mean by the distribution of outcomes is going to be a bell curve? Well, what it means is the people on the front end of that curve are going to succeed. The people on the back end of that curve are going to fail. And most of the people are going to finish in this big herd in the middle. So what can we say about that big herd in the middle? Well, what we can say about that big herd in the middle is that most of them, not all, but most, the vast majority of those people in the middle are going to succeed. They'll be okay. But now if they're going to be okay, why does that little girl look so scared and upset? Well, here's the reason she looks scared and upset. When William Bengen kind of developed his 4% rule, basically what he did is he said, we're going to run 10,000 simulations. We're going to pick different withdrawals rates. We're going to run 10,000 simulations, and we're going to see which one does best, which one has the best rate of success. Well, the question came up, okay, but what do you mean by success? What's the definition of success? So they said, well, the definition of success is when you die, you have at least $1 left in your account. So that's some of these people in the middle. They're going to do the math. They're going to look at, they're going to get 6-7 years from retirement. They're going to realize how, they're going to know how much they spend each year. They're going to know about 7 years left in life expectancy, and they're going to multiply what they spend each year times 7 and come up with a number, and they're going to look at their account balance and say, we're not going to make it. We're going to fail. We're going we're not going to make it. They're going to be 100% convinced that they're not going to make it. Only when they get to the end of their life, they're actually going to have $1 or $2, or literally $1 or $2 or $5 in their account. So we're going to call them a success. That's going to be some of those people in the middle. For some of those people in the middle, for others of those people in the middle, they're going to do the math and they're going to realize, hey, we're not going to make it. We're definitely not going to make it. Only as they go through those last few years of their life, there's a surprise uptick in the market. So they end up being okay, even though they were sure they weren't going to be okay. So that's going to be other people in the middle. Some of them are going to have $1 left in their account. So even though they thought they weren't going to be okay, they're okay. Others are going to realize we're not going to be okay, but because of the surprise uptick in the market 2 years before they died, they end up being okay. Others are going to realize we're not going to be okay. They do the math. They realize we're not going to be okay. Only instead of a surprise uptick in the market, there's a surprise of another kind. There's a surprise heart attack or a surprise stroke or a surprise car accident. They don't live as long as they thought they were going to live. So when they die, there's actually money in their account. So yay, success. But now imagine spending the last years of your life absolutely sure you were going to fail and going to bed every night for the last 5 or 6 years that you're alive, wishing you were dead. That's what's going to happen if we hit that downturn in the middle. So reason number 3, it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain is that even success feels a lot like failure. Reason number 4, a market crash is a lot more worrisome. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you think back to the 2 market crashes we've had in the last 20 years, they kind of look like this. They've been these steep drops, but they've been short-lived. They last 18, 20 months, followed by this raging bull market, this almost record recovery. Now, you could almost make a case that that kind of correction is a good thing. And why do I say some people are saying that's a good thing? Well, because there are people on this call that benefited mightily from this very thing happening. And even if you didn't benefit personally from it happening, you all have clients that benefited from this very thing happening because they weren't retired. So yeah, they saw a downturn in their investment accounts, but now they're looking at their account balances and saying, wow, who knew we were going to be in this great position? I mean, this is awesome. I never imagined it would be this good. That's what some people are saying. You're not saying that if you were retired. Because even if you stuck with the 4% rule, look at the difference between the blue line and the orange line. It's not so great. In fact, when you think about it, those are the exact same downturns that these people experienced. The people who retired in 2000, 2001 and didn't make it, there was a steep drop followed by a record recovery, and then a steep drop followed by a record recovery. And even though they stuck to 4% withdrawals and their average return was 5.58%, meaning their withdrawal rate was actually lower than their average growth rate, they still ran out of money. I mean, here's where they retired, in the middle of that purple span. They experienced that downturn, but then that record bull market. Then they experienced this downturn. Hopefully you guys can see my pointer. They experienced this initial downturn, but then that record bull market. Then they experienced this downturn in 2008, and then this record bull market, and they ran out of money right about here. So even though they experienced 2 record bull markets in their lifetime, they ran out of money because of this phenomenon, because they were withdrawing money from their accounts and not saving money from their accounts. So reason number 4 that it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up is a crash is more worrisome. Any crash, even if it's followed by record gains. And that's why it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up. Reason number 5, your withdrawals and the market are pulling in different directions. And so here's what I mean by that. When you're saving for retirement, when you're climbing the retirement mountain, your savings and the market are all going in the same direction. It's a little bit like paddling downstream. So you're getting there fast because the market's pulling you to where you want to go and you're paddling. In fact, when you think about it, that's exactly why we get this blue chart. Even though things can go bad, because you're all pulling in the same direction, it's no problem. You're still going to make it. You hit that downturn at the beginning, no worries. We'll just paddle a little harder. And then when the market recovers, we'll let it pull us along. And then if it goes down again, we'll paddle some more. And then we'll let it pull us along. And then we'll paddle some more. And then we'll pull us along. Either way, we're going to get to where we need to go because everything's pulling in the same direction. That's why you get that phenomenon of everyone making it up the retirement mountain, given enough time. But then you hit this green patch. That's a little bit like paddling upstream. It's not the same. Your withdrawals are carrying you downstream and you're counting on your growth, the paddling, to kind of counterbalance that, or at least keep you from falling so far backward that you go over a cliff. And if the current doesn't play nice, you're in a lot of trouble. And that's why it's so much harder. That's reason number 5, that it's so much harder to go down the mountain than it is to go up. It's easy to go up. The market's helping you. It's not so easy coming down because you're hurting yourself by your withdrawals, and the market may or may not help you. The reality is the market probably will help you at times. But if you're going to be retired 30 years, it's insane to think that the market's going to be your friend each and every one of those 30 years. Doesn't happen. We can see from experience it doesn't work that way. There are people that retired in 2000, 2001 that will tell you, hey, it doesn't work that way. Reason number 6, that it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up. And this one's, again, a pretty big deal, and it's something that we don't talk about often enough. So reason number 6 is the market is not a random walk. So let me kind of explain what I mean by that. And to do that, let me kind of go back again to what William Bengen did when he formulated this 4% rule. Basically, what he did is he tested it against what's called a stochastic model. So what's a stochastic model? Well, he looked back in history and he said, well, what's the best that the market has ever done in any one year? What's the biggest gain? And let's say it was 30%, plus 30%. Now, I don't know if that's what it was. I'm making that up. And then he looked and said, well, what's the worst that the market has ever done in any one year? And let's just say it was minus 30%. Now, again, I don't know if that was the actual number, but he set 2 parameters. He said, this is the best the market could do at the top, and this is the worst it could do at the bottom. And then we'll just say that it can do anything in between in any order. It was truly random. And then he ran 10,000 scenarios and figured out, well, which of these withdrawal rates comes out to be a success more often than not. But in his testing model, the market truly was random. But we know for an absolute fact that the market's not random. Now, how do we know for an absolute fact that the market's not random? Well, because we have charts like this. See, if the market was random, what we would expect is to see this chart be flat, like a tabletop. Sure, there would be ups, sure, there would be downs, but over time it would all even out because it was random and it would be flat. It would be like flipping a coin. It's not always heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails. You can get 8 heads in a row, But if you're going to do that over time, we know that eventually you're going to hit a patch of tails. We know the market's random because this chart definitely isn't flat. In fact, we can see that it goes up. And we can see that it goes up pretty steady. So this line, if mathematicians were looking at this, they'd say, well, that line, that blue line that kind of shows you the rise or the path of the market going up kind of steadily, has a definite slope. And slope is defined as a ratio. It's the rise, so how much it goes up, the rise over the run across, rise over run, rise over run. Well, we're not mathematicians. What economists and financial advisors would say is, yeah, it's a ratio, but it's not rise over run. It's stock price over earnings per share. It's the price to earnings ratio. And we know that that PE ratio has a mean because the slope of that line that represents the market going up is more or less straight. And so we use things like the CAPE, the cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio, to smooth out the year-to-year fluctuations in PE to help us see more clearly what the mean or the average is of that price to earnings ratio, what the slope of that line is. Now, we can't use that PE to predict what the market will do next year or the next year, but we know that if it's going to continue on this path up, that there must be a mean, meaning if we hit this, if we have these 12 heads in a row, these gray areas, we're bound to hit these purple patches, followed by a gray patch, followed by a purple patch, followed by a gray patch, followed by a purple patch. So we have this gray, purple, gray, purple, gray. So we would expect a purple somewhere in our future. And when Mike gets on the call and he says, hey, all the indicators are flashing red, what he means is everything is saying, hey, this is a pretty long gray span. We should probably expect some, we've had a lot of heads in a row. We should probably expect some tails. Beware, beware, be careful. It's dangerous. That's what all those indicators are saying. Not that the market's going to do bad the following year. It's just that, hey, we're due for a purple span. We're due for a purple span. Now at 5Q, we always tell you that anything worth saying should be said by the client and not by you. So yeah, I think it's important to let people know that there's a purple span on the horizon. But even better than me saying that would be them saying that. And that, believe it or not, that's a very, very easy thing to get people to say. When you show them a chart like this and you ask them, hey, we don't know what the market's going to do this year or the next, but if you had to guess, would you say that we're in for another year, 10 years of this gray, or would you say that we might be in for some purple? What do you think? Well, guess what everybody says? Oh no, we're probably in for a run of purple. That's what everybody says. They even know it. We know it. They know it. It's not something that you even have to convince people of. And given that fact, you could make the case that now might be the absolute worst time to think about retiring, because you know you're going to hit that rough patch. And like we looked at, you don't just have to worry about that rough patch in the first 3 or 4 years. You probably have to worry about that rough patch for the first 12 or 13. If you're going to be retired for 25 or 30 years. So if you're 65, thinking we're going to live to 85 or 90, yeah, this is probably not the time to be thinking about retiring. So reason number 6, the market's not a random walk. Those are the 6 reasons that it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up. I mean, we say that it's harder to come down than it is to go up, but sometimes I don't think we think enough about why it's so much more difficult to come down than up. It really is a lot harder to come down than it is to go up. And again, we can't know for sure what the market's going to be like in the future. But one thing we can be pretty sure of is that we probably can't just rely on the 4% rule, because these people relied on the 4% rule. These people experienced 2 record-setting bull markets, and they still ran out of money. So the 4% rule probably isn't going to work. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. I mean, I'm sure you guys have all seen articles like this lately, where they're talking about how, hey, the 4% rule probably isn't going to work going forward. And so what do these people, the people who are saying the 4% rule is not going to work, what's their advice? Well, here's some advice from this very same article. Consider the use of public transportation, which is typically subsidized. This could be another factor on where to live in retirement. For example, Philadelphia's transit system is free for seniors age 65 and up. In Charlotte, people age 62 and up pay half fares. Guys, that's their advice? If you're going to retire now, consider public transportation. I think we can do a little bit better than that. So we're going to take a look at some solutions. So when we talk about solutions, we always acknowledge, there's different ways to take money from a portfolio. There's more than one way to skin this cat. And we even point people to a report put out by the American Institute for Economic Research that details some of those ways. So if you look inside that report, you'll see they actually talk about 7 different ways of taking money from your portfolio. And sometimes I'll get calls from people that'll say, hey, I know we talk about different ways that you can take money from your portfolio. And so is there some sort of software where I can enter people's withdrawals and their information, and it will spit out the ideal way, the perfect way of all of these options for them to take money? And the answer is no, there's no software like that. But just because there's no software like that doesn't mean we can't figure out what's the best way for that particular person to take money. So what I always do is I always say, well, if you give me any withdrawal strategy you can come up with, I can put it into 3 categories, 3 buckets, if you will. A fixed withdrawal strategy, a variable withdrawal strategy, and a glide path strategy. So let's talk about these. A fixed withdrawal strategy is where you're taking out a fixed amount from the portfolio each year. That's what the 4% rule is. It's saying, hey, take 4% of your portfolio. So if you have $1 million, take out $40,000, and all we're going to do is adjust it for inflation. But otherwise, it's the same $40,000 each year. It's just adjusted for with inflation. So the 4% rule is a fixed withdrawal rule. Then there are variable withdrawal rules and glide path strategies and rules. Now, knowing that all of those strategies will go in one of those 3 buckets, I also take into consideration that there's kind of this perfect storm of bad on the horizon, or I'd almost say we're in the middle of it. What's that perfect storm of bad? Well, we talked about how coming down the mountain is so much harder than going up. We looked in depth at 6 reasons why. But if that weren't enough, there's actually these conditions that make retiring even more tricky than that at the moment. Those perfect storm of conditions are these, 3 of them. 1, we seem to be in an era of persistently low interest rates. Now I know interest rates are going up, but they're still pretty low historically. And so the problem that poses is that whatever fixed investments you have, whether CDs or bonds or whatever it may be, it used to be that you could count on those things for income. And now with interest rates so low, it's not going to be a lot of income. We're not going to be able to just live off that interest. So persistently low interest rates, that's one problem. The second problem is this bleak CAPE forecast. Remember, we said that the market's not a random walk and we should expect a purple span sometime soon. Now, we don't know if it's going to be this year or next year or the next year, but it's soon. That's what all those indicators that Mike always brings up are saying, that, hey, that would be a really bad time to retire. So it's a bad time to retire because we have persistently low interest rates, and it's a bad time to retire because we know that there's a purple span in our future. Number 3, longevity. It's a really bad time because people are retiring so much longer. Hey, there used to be a day not that long ago, when I was a kid, people retired at 65 and the average life expectancy was 72 or 73. So you had to live 7 or 8 years. So you really didn't have to worry about a purple span. You didn't have to worry about living a long time. You didn't have to worry about low interest rates. Hey, you can survive anything if all you need to do is get through 5, 6, 7 years. But now when people are trying to retire earlier and earlier, so 65 is still pretty average, but you've all met people who are trying to retire at 60 or 62, and they're not going to die at 72 or 73, hopefully, but we know they're probably going to live into their 80s or 90s. That makes it really tough. And so when you have the fact that it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain, and you have this perfect storm of conditions, all those articles that say the 4% rule is dead are basically saying you can't use a fixed withdrawal strategy, not unless you're going to use something ridiculously low like 2.5 or 3%. These fixed withdrawal strategies, they're not going to work given those circumstances. So if we just crossed out the fixed withdrawal strategies, you'd see that, that now we're not trying to choose between 8, we're choosing between 4. That leaves us with variable withdrawal strategies and glide path strategies. So let's talk about variable withdrawal strategies for a second. Variable withdrawal strategies are strategies that say, hey, we're not going to take out the same amount every year. Our withdrawals are going to vary, thus the word variable. Some years there'll be more, some years there'll be less, and there's rules for figuring out when it's more and how much more, or when it's less and how much less. Now, variable strategies, they could work, and they would work. Variable strategies would work, but there's a couple problems with variable strategies. The first problem with variable strategies is clients don't like them. They're not palatable. You tell that to a client and they're going to look at you sideways like, I'm not sure, this doesn't sound like my cup of tea. The reason they're thinking that is because they're hearing you say, hey, there might be years when we have to take less. So they're thinking, okay, so I'll have less income. My income is going to go down, but I don't think my mortgage is going to go down, or my car payments are going to go down, or my utilities are going to go down, or my health insurance is going to go down. I don't like that idea. So the first problem is they're not palatable. The second problem is while you wouldn't run out of money, you probably would run out of spending power. And here's what I mean by that. Just imagine somebody with $1 million and you said, just take 50% of whatever's in your account each year. Well, the first year they take 500,000, then they take 250, then 125, then 67. You can see that they'll never run out of money. It's just that at some point it'll get to be so small that it won't be able to meet their expenses. So an example in these 8 of a variable withdrawal strategy is this required minimum distribution percentage. Basically what they're saying is, hey, when you retire at say 65, go ahead and take 4% each year. But once you turn 70, just use the RMD table. It'll take your account balance and we'll divide it by a divisor. You can find the divisor on that table and that'll tell you how much to take. Well, because your account balance is a variable in that, if your account balance is up, then you'll end up taking more. If your account balance is down, you'll end up taking less. How much less depends on what that divisor is, but that's a variable withdrawal strategy. And again, because they're not palatable and because you wouldn't run out of money, but you could run out of spending power, we're not going to use any of those either. So we can just cross those off our list. So that leaves us with glide path strategies. So what's a glide path strategy? Well, you're all familiar with the idea of a glide path because if you've ever seen the FIA compared to bond presentation, there's a chart that looks like this. This is a description of a glide path. Basically, what a glide path is saying, hey, the risk to running out of money in retirement is at the beginning. So we're going to be super conservative at the beginning. There's still some risk in the middle, so we're still going to be conservative, but we can maybe ease up off the brake a little bit. And then at the end, yeah, there's risk, but you're still probably going to be okay, so we can probably not worry. So we'll start with, say, 30% in equity, something really low. But then as you age, we'll get to something really high. We'll go from low to high. We've got this glide path from 0 to 100, not literally 0 to 100, more like 30 to 90, but we start with 30, we work our way up to 90. So you could be 90 years old and have 90% of your portfolio in equities, and probably that would be okay. You just don't want to have that at the beginning. You want to have more like 30%. That's what's going to keep you in the green. That's a glide path strategy when we start talking about asset allocation. So what's a glide path strategy when we start talking about withdrawals? Well, here's a picture of a glide path strategy when we start talking about withdrawals. It's the sale plan. The sale plan is saying, hey, it's really dangerous at the beginning of the your first retirement year. So let's be really conservative. There's still some danger in the beginning, but we can probably take our foot off the brake a little bit, and then we can take our foot off the brake a lot as we get further in time. That's what the sale is. The sale is a plan that makes sure that, hey, we're going to protect ourselves from this happening. We don't have to worry about running out of money. And we're still going to give ourselves the opportunity to grow our portfolio so that we can give ourselves raises, or we can leave a big legacy if that's what we want to do. We'll either spend more or leave more to our kids, one or the other. But we're going to take this idea of running out of money off the table. We'll take that risk off the table. Basically, what the sale is a way to play the game without ever having to worry about losing. It takes the risk of losing off the table. So all you can do is do okay or finish fabulously wealthy. The other thing I like about the sale is, the first thing I like about it is that you can't lose. You don't have to worry about running out of money. The second thing I really like about the sale is it's really easy to market. It makes for a great USP. And remember, a USP is something that would get people to say those 4 things. I've never heard that before. How does that work? Tell me more. I want that. Can you do that for me? So here's the USP. I show people how to increase the income generated by their current investments by 25% by using a formula developed at the University of San Francisco School of Business. And I show people how they can use those same strategies to give themselves 20% pay raises every 3 to 5 years without ever having to worry about taking a pay cut. Now, if somebody heard that, any part of that, would they say, wow, I've never heard that before? How does that work? Tell me more. Huh, I'd like that. I'd like 25% more income. Can you do that for me? That's what makes it so marketable. That's what gets people to want to meet with you. That's what gets you to take them through the process. That's what gets you to close those big cases. It's the sale plan. It's a glide path withdrawal strategy that's very marketable, that works. And remember, they need something like that. Given that those 6 reasons that it's so much more difficult to come down the retirement mountain than it is to go up. And given the fact that on top of that, we're staring down some really tricky conditions right now, it's really scary to think about coming down the mountain right now. You need more than a thumb rule like the 4% strategy. You need a plan, and that's what the sale is. It's a plan that will get them down the retirement mountain without having to worry about running out of money, and still give them the opportunity to get pay raises or leave a bigger legacy. So again, I apologize for not really being able to follow the comments or the questions, but if you do have any comments or you do have any questions, again, just feel free to email me or call me, and I'd be happy to talk to you and answer any questions that you might have. So that's all for today. Again, Mike's out this week, but everybody else is here. So you guys have a great week, and Mike will be back, and we'll talk to you all Monday. Thanks, guys.